Hi. As I mentioned in the earlier video, normally there'll just be one video, but I had some technical difficulties. Um, I don't know what happened with the internet. Anyway, kind of going back to realism. Realism, of course, is a moment in time, and it is a period that you can study, and they normally will bookend it between 1865 and 1900. But it also exists as a way of writing, as a mode of writing. And in fact, most of the books that we enjoy reading, the stories we enjoy hearing, the films that we enjoy watching, all have their roots in the notion of realism. And even sometimes further back in the earlier periods of Romanticism and, of course, Victorian storytelling. But realism really does focus on that sense of disillusion and despair. Now, I know that many of you posted about the disillusion and despair in the works. In fact, Chandra mentioned that Chickamauga was really disturbing, and it was mostly disturbing because it captured the sense of disillusionment in the character of the boy. Chandra, like many of you others, posted that the act of reading this text was really also one of rereading. And remember, it's a good point to just keep in mind, like Vladimir Nabokov said, there are no good readers, there are only good rereaders, and that the act of engaging a text does require more than one kind of go-through. Kristen also mentioned this notion of idealism towards fighting. Kristen also pulled in a great video link and adaptation of this story, so thank you, Kristen. But I also really like the fact that you mentioned this kind of sad lesson. And one of the things that realism really did in reference to the war that had just happened between the states is that it highlighted and criticized, it was very critical of the idealism of war. So this notion of disillusionment, this notion of being critical of idealism are key elements that are appearing during this period, and of course appearing in Chickamauga. Now, Kayla brought forward and engaged Kate Chopin's The Storm, which really is vivid and descriptive, as she points out, but also kind of looks at the disintegration of not just mind and a body, but of a spirit, but also kind of thinking about how one during this period captures realistically the mental deterioration. Also, Kayla mentioned that the Tar Baby stories and, of course, Mr. Fox, which were kind of written in that dialect, actually captured a very engaging portion of realism, which is local color realism. So the other thing with realism is that it does capture a sense of the local community, and that means of a space and a specific place and a specific time. So thanks for bringing that up, Kayla. Shannon, once again, much like Kristen, really proposed this viewpoint, and Chandra really proposed this viewpoint of reading. Read twice. And there's a good sense in Shannon's work of the notion that realism and naturalism try to capture the average or what's going on in the everyday. And that is true. It's kind of almost objective, but that's much more naturalism than realism. Realism is much more subjective, and naturalism is much more objective, as naturalism really does focus on the scientific determination and this notion of looking at how we are all these animals only pursuing our, I guess you'd say, our instinctual response without the social or moral code that guide us. Priscilla really did an excellent post. I loved Priscilla's notion on how there are certain symbols that are functioning. And Priscilla also really talked about the idea, which we just talked about in local color, in capturing a space and place, and she mentioned that this black dialect really located the story at a specific time and a specific tone and setting. She also loved Roman Fever by Edith Wharton, which Edith Wharton is probably one of the more enjoyable reads because she does present a kind of a drama and a little bit of an interior realism versus an external realism like Chickamauga. Clyde really talked about how realism could instruct, and remember, at this time, literature and stories were meant to both instruct and delight. They were supposed to be a tidbit on the didactic. Now, realism, while it is didactic, it's didactic through act, not didactic through telling. Bianca coined the phrase bitter Bierce connection with Chickamauga. She talked about the description, kind of that realistic quality, which once again points back to that notion of being didactic through an act, not didactic through don't do this, but by showing what not to do. Deanna mentioned and pulled in Wharton as being a good example of realism, which is key, and Roman Fever is. It's realism in the sense that it's not about, it is the disillusionment and kind of the questioning, but it's also the sense of capturing the feel and the timbre of an experience, which then Katie picked up on by mentioning that Roman Fever captured this drama that created a connection with the community, and that also, you know, this notion of being outside of America. But that Katie also mentioned that Hart in particular captured this frontier sense, and that with the realism too, it's also about pushing boundaries, you know, whether they be boundaries of culture or boundaries of social, but pushing them